Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG Show for Wednesday, August the 25th, 2021. Let's see, what do I start with today? Oh, yes. Someone, VD Revivalist, sent a tweet to me, and it was a video of Chevy Chase doing a joke about senility. And the comment was, KMG Victoria may be a jerk, but still funny. I'm a little hurt by that, I must say. I mean, I don't really think I'm up in the Chevy Chase category. You remember Chevy Chase was on Community, which was, it really rescued his career. And in a way, it was the role of a lifetime. And he decided that the show wasn't funny and that he was going to go out of his way to sabotage it, which was a great pity. But let's start with something that was brought up in the chat yesterday. Does race exist? And Jared Taylor is having a debate with E. Michael Jones. Race is a Fiction, my debate with Jared Taylor. This is at uns.com. This is a really silly essay by E. Michael Jones, and I have to say that I've lost a lot of respect for him as a result. He begins, our topic today is race an important topic or a fiction? And if so, I'd like to begin our discussion of the concept of race with a reminder that historically race referred to ethnicity as well as physical characteristics. Yes, and? But before I do that, I'd like to explain the difference between categories of the mind and categories of nature or reality by describing the biggest crisis to hit Indiana since the Civil War. I'm talking about the decision to put Indiana on daylight saving time. On April 29, 2005, with heavy backing from Governor Mitch Daniels' economic development plan, and after years of controversy, the Indiana General Assembly passed a law stating that effective April 2nd, 2006, the entire state of Indiana would become the 48th state to observe daylight saving time. What no one knew at the time is that Indiana had weathered a similar crisis in the 1970s by refusing to reset their clocks twice a year. The unsung heroine in the time change battle of the 1970s was a woman who called into a talk show and opined that her lawn was already brown and one more hour of sunlight would kill it completely. That argument carried the day in Indiana for almost 40 years, and it was in that woman's honor that I wrote what is probably the only song in existence on daylight saving time. The more philosophically minded among you may have noticed that there is a flaw in her argument. She made a category mistake by confusing categories of nature or reality with categories of the mind. The day is divided into hours based on a category of the mind, which can be changed. The year is based on a certain number of days, which is fixed and cannot be changed. Well, the error that the woman made is rather different than the one that E. Michael Jones uses. Daylight saving time does not give one more hour of sunlight. It simply shifts sunlight forward. So the sun goes down an hour later. Of course, the sun comes up an hour later as well. What does all this have to do with race? Jones asked. Well, that's a very good question. Race, as we now understand the term, is a conflation of categories of reality and categories of the mind. I've been asked to defend the proposition that race is a fiction as opposed to an important reality. Those of us who have studied philosophy will recognize that the topic of the debate is based on what philosophers would call a false dichotomy. And then he goes on to mention Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter and says it is what you would call a piece of fiction. It is, in other words, real. Fiction, in other words, is not a fiction. Okay, then, Mr. Jones. To be more specific, race, as we now understand the term, is a category of the mind which gets imposed on subject peoples as a form of marginalization and control. There are many categories of the mind, and many of them are useful. When we say that a person is smart, for example, what does that mean? Does that have any precise meaning? No, it does not. Is above average, does above average intelligence make one smart in the way that that word is commonly used? Would we say that a person with a 101 IQ was smart? No, we would not. But as you go up the scale, it becomes more difficult. Mensa has a, what's the cutoff for Mensa? 139 IQ, something like that. Okay, so Mensa is called the Genius Club. I think it's a silly organization, but never mind that. I'm just using it as an example. So would 139 IQ be considered smart? Well, how about compared to 160 IQ or John von Neumann, who reportedly had an IQ of over 200? Well, 139 IQ looks pretty puny compared to John von Neumann's reported 200. But once again, there are certain categories, shorthand words that we use, which are very useful. Jones continues, according to the OED, race refers to, quote, a group of persons, animals, or plants connected by common descent or origin, the offspring or posterity of a person, a set of children or descendants, a limited group of persons descended from a common ancestor, a house, family, kindred, a tribe, nation, or people regarded as of common stock, unquote. Jones comments, in Europe in the Middle Ages, everyone belonged to one limited group of persons descended from a common ancestor or another, but the white race was a completely unknown concept, irrelevant. The earliest example of a European author referring to fellow Europeans as white people didn't occur until 1613, when an African king in Thomas Middleton's play, The Triumphs of Truth, looks out on an English audience and declares, I see amazement set upon the faces of these white people, wonderings and strange gazes. Jones continues, when I refer to myself as biracial, meaning that I come from Irish and German stock, I'm simply making use of what was once the accepted meaning of the term according to the OED, which defines race as a group of several tribes or peoples forming a distinct ethnic stock. In 1883, Green wrote in his Conquest of England that courage was the heritage of the whole German race. Biracial, is he? This is too cute by half. He is pretending not to know what people mean, what they think, when, for instance, they use the word white or black. He continues, the term race was also used to describe one of the great divisions of mankind. Race in this instance meant having certain physical peculiarities in common. In 1861, Blumenbach grouped those physical peculiarities into 5 races. First, the Caucasian, second, the Mongolian, third, the Ethiopian, fourth, the American, and fifth, the Malay. But this was only one use of the term. Well, again, many terms have more than one use. Your point being, Dr. Jones? So what do we mean when we say that race is real? We mean that ethnicity has always been a category of reality. We also mean that physical characteristics are real and that they differ depending on what part of the planet you come from. The shape of your nose and the color of your skin are categories of reality. The virtues or vices associated with them, however, are categories of the mind, which get applied for political reasons. No, sometimes for political reasons, not necessarily for political reasons. Now, obviously, there are hundreds of different tribes in Africa, or in let's say sub-Saharan Africa, but we refer to them as black people, and everybody knows what that means. So to get back to our original example, does the fact that the 24-hour day is a category of the mind mean that there is no difference between night and day? No, of course not. Jones writes, the 24-hour day organizes day and night. It does not replace them. Similarly, categories like the white race, whether they are cited by Jared Taylor or Noel Ignatieff, mobilize biological characteristics for political purposes in a way that is independent of the characteristics themselves. Had the white race been known in the Middle Ages, it would have been called a universal. A universal is something outside of nature which is brought to nature in order to organize nature and make it, as a result, comprehensible. Universals can also be used to weaponize nature for political purposes. And To give a recent example of the manipulation of universals for political purposes, there is a group of people, and I happen to be one of them, who voted for Donald Trump in 2016. This is a category of reality. These people have real identities, they have names and addresses, and presumably all of them are registered voters, and if they're not, they should be. Then he goes on to talk about Hillary Clinton, describing Trump voters as a basket of deplorables. I don't think... Jones is pretending he doesn't know the difference between a categorization, a term, as rough as it might be, and an insult. He continues, the term deplorable is also a form of identity theft of the sort which took place last summer in St. Louis when Umar Lee, who started off life as a white boy, became a Negro when he went to high school and ended up as a Muslim, described the people who wanted to prevent the removal of the statue of St. Louis as white supremacists. When they gathered around the statue, that group of people could be seen praying the rosary, which indicates that they were Catholics. If Lee had identified them as Catholics, however, he would have lost that battle. In fact, when I identified them as Catholics in an article of Culture Wars, he did lose the battle because Catholics still have rights and white supremacists don't. White supremacist was a category of the mind, but Catholic was a category of reality. Where did white supremacism come in here? Is he saying that Jared Taylor is a white supremacist, whatever that might be? Frankly, I don't know what white supremacist could mean in 2021, but there are people accused of being white supremacists, and people accused of being white supremacists are typically those who are unwilling to disappear. Jones continues, critical race theory is based on sociology. White racism is based on biology, but both ideologies are forms of identity theft, which manipulate categories of the mind for political purposes. If I asked anyone watching this debate if they were white, most would agree they were. But if I asked them if they were a Mzungu, I would probably get a different response. This mutatis mutandis is precisely what happened to Europeans when they emigrated to America. Before their arrival, they had no understanding of themselves as white because both black and white are as categories of the mind are dependent upon geography and culture, even though the features that make up our understanding are categories of nature, which are independent of context. Because there were no black people in Lithuania, Lithuanians did not consider themselves white. In Vilnius, they were known as Lithuanians, but when Martin Luther King showed up in the Lithuanian neighborhood in Chicago known as Marquette Park, they became white, largely because they dared to oppose King's attempt to take over their neighborhood. You see, Jones is somewhat edging towards the truth here. And then he goes on about Lithuanians, Tanzania, Kikuyu, but what he really wants to do in this essay is, well, to bash Jews. This is what it comes down to. And he mentions, this is just unexpectedly hilarious. According to the triple melting pot theory, which specifies that after 3 generations, religion becomes a source of ethnic identity in America. America is made up of 3 ethnic groups based on 3 religions, Protestant, Catholic, and Jew. This is absolutely absurd. Absolutely absurd. When we call someone a Protestant, what do we mean by that? Do we mean that this person attends a church? That this person believes in the divinity of Jesus Christ and other things? Probably not, actually, because most people described as Protestant don't believe in those things. Catholic, even if you're talking about people who are baptized Catholic, do these people attend Mass? Do they believe in the Nicene Creed? Do they believe in the divinity of Christ? Do they believe in the real presence? These days, most of them don't. Of course, Jew is both an ethnic description and a religious description, but in the United States at present, the majority of Jews are not religiously Jewish. Jones continues, Estelle Griswold was the extremely white wife of a Yale professor. Birth control was a Protestant crusade, which got its initial funding from the equally white Rockefeller family. Again, your point being, Hollywood was a Jewish creation from its inception, as was pornography. The Catholics fought both groups on these issues. Race played no role in that conflict. Seriously? And if race is superimposed on that conflict as its ultimate explicator, then what happened then remains forever mysterious. Okay, so are we supposed to believe from Mr. Jones that the Jews in Hollywood in pornography attempted, they went to synagogue every week? They kept the holidays? I'm sure some of them did. But is that a universal? No, clearly not. The Cultural Revolution of the 60s, which led to skyrocketing illegitimacy rates among both black and white populations, took place totally within the purview of the triple melting pot, which specified religion, not race, as the matrix of cultural conflict in America. Religion has not been the matrix of cultural conflict in America for decades, because religion is frankly not particularly important in America today. As far as Catholicism is concerned, in 1960, when it was widely believed that a Catholic could not be elected president of the United States, and you saw what happened to the first Catholic to run for president, Al Smith, John F. Kennedy was persuaded to attend an inquisition, as it were, by Protestant divines. And they were satisfied with his answers, because what Kennedy had told them was that his religion was going to play no role whatsoever in any decision that he made. And that is not an answer that a real Catholic would give. Now, as far as the Irish go, the 1965 Hart-Celler Act, well, that was a Philip Hart from Michigan and Emmanuel Celler from New York. And their desire to radically change the demography of America was based on ethnic animus. Hart was of Irish extraction and Celler was of Jewish extraction, and they thought that the WASPs had too much power, and there were too many of them. Time to shake things up. So, and many, to my great sorrow, many of the worst politicians in both Canada and in the United States are of Irish extraction. Jones continues, race, in other words, does not explain the statistics Taylor himself cites. By using race as this criterion of social pathology, Taylor, in fact, provides cover for the real perpetrators of cultural decay. Well, it can always get worse, can't it? I think that is the point that Jared Taylor is making, and I'm quite sure that Jared Taylor is well familiar with the establishment of liberalism as a religious substitute in America, eventually supplanting Christianity as the majority religion. Jones writes, which leads us to our first question, are Jews white? This question has already been answered for us by another Jewish organization, the Southern Poverty Law Center, which heaped praise on Taylor's organization, American Renaissance. I pointed this out in Culture Wars in 2007, an article describing how both organizations manipulated race to cover up the real actors in America's ongoing saga of cultural tribal warfare. The SPLC is a Jewish defamation operation similar to the ADL, which demonized John Sharp as a racist anti-Semite because he attended one of Jared Taylor's American Renaissance conferences. And white nationalism again. White nationalism again. So congratulations, Jared, for making Jews fit for polite company. Yes, he talks about Barbara Lerner Specter. Now, it is true. There's no question about it. That in the quest to destroy what remains of Western civilization, Jews tend to be at the forefront of this, or that better to say that one can point out many Jews prominent Jews calling for the destruction of traditional Canada, America, England, etc. But this process was well underway before Jews got any significant power in the United States, Canada, or England. And he quotes Johns Hopkins professor Yasha Monk, Israeli academic Ronit Lenton, and the recent cheering of news that the population of white people declining in the United States. Is Roberta Kaplan white, Jared? Is Jennifer Rubin white, Jared? He says. So the whole point of this article seems to be E. Michael Jones exiling Jews from the category of white. Now, the overwhelming majority of Jews believe themselves to be white. I would say that amongst the Jewish elite, they do not believe this, but they do not represent all Jews. Why do we talk about white people in America, Canada? To give two examples. Well, it largely has to do with the rise of the Black Power movement in America in the 1960s, which was an us-them movement. Blacks were good, white people were devils. And so this comparison to the devil was made quite often. So what were Black people against? What was Black Power against? Was it against restrictions on the civil rights of what used to be called Negroes? No, because that was pretty much all cleaned up by 1965. What Black Power was against was white people. And by white people, they didn't care whether these people were Protestant or Catholic or of Polish or Italian or of Irish extraction, although the Black radicals then and now seem to have a particular hatred for the Jews. We see rising in the 1990s, the Reverend Jesse Jackson. Hey, 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 ho, this is at Stanford. Western Civ has got to go. That the Black leadership identifying itself as a specific enemy of Western civilization, which was equated with whiteness. And so this put whites in the United States, Canada, England, and elsewhere in the position of defending themselves based on a qualification which was imposed on them. Yes, this was political. Yes, it was hostile. That makes no difference whatsoever. There's a car parked in the parking lot now from California, and it has all these stickers. You know, smash the patriarchy, smash white supremacy, hide and embarrass, be kind, become a vegan, and all this. White supremacy? What white supremacy? Now, we are told at the same time that race is a cultural construct. Oh, it is it? So if you go up to Black people, the type who say Black Lives Matters, which is most of them, and tell them that there's no such thing as Black people, what do you think the response to that would be? It's no good E. Michael Jones telling them that they're wrong, that it's not really important. This is a category error you're making. This is absolutely absurd. That Jones is steadfastly refusing to recognize the world as it exists. And this is particularly strange at a time when, after the killing of St. George Floyd, war has pretty much been declared on, yes, white people in the United States, in my country of Canada, in England, and elsewhere. Jones's response is, his opening argument, it's fatuous. There's no other way that I can describe it. A philosopher examines the world as it is, not as he would like it to be. So let's go to someone here who has written about race a lot. That would be Steve Saylor. And in May of 2014, he published something called the Race FAQ. Why do you talk about race so much? Most human beings talk about race a fair amount. I write about it. Why do people care about race? Why do people care about who their relatives are? Maybe they should care. Maybe they shouldn't. I'm not here to preach morality, but people do care. So it's important to understand the implications. What's race all about? Relatedness. Race is about who is related to whom. Do you mean a race is a family? Yes, an extended family. To be precise, a particular type of extended family, one that's more coherent over time than the norm, a distinction I'll explain below. Race means family. I've never heard of such a thing. It's remarkable how seldom this concept is essential to understanding how the world works as mentioned in the press. Yet, in my Random House Webster's College Dictionary, the first definition of race is, 1, a group of people related by common descent or heredity. If races exist, then pray tell precisely how many there are. How many neighborhoods are there in the place where you live? For some purposes, an extremely simple breakdown into, say, city versus suburbs is most useful. Similarly, racial groups can be lumped into vast continental scale agglomerations or split as finely as you like. For instance, should New World Indians be considered a separate race or merely a subset of East Asians? Every system of categorization runs into disputes between lumpers and splitters. Whether lumping or splitting is more appropriate depends upon the situation. Isn't race just about skin color? That's a simplistic verbal shorthand Americans use to refer to ancestry. Nobody really acts as if they believe race is synonymous with skin color. What do you mean? Consider golfer Vijay Singh, who during 2004 to 2005 became the only man in this decade, besides Tiger Woods, to become the #1 ranked player in the world. Singh, who was born in the Fiji Islands of Asian Indian descent, is much darker in skin color than Woods. Singh is at least as dark as the average African American, yet nobody in America ever thinks of Singh as Black or African American. There's an enormous industry that celebrates the triumphs of Blacks in non-traditional venues such as golf, but Singh's accomplishments elicited minimal interest in the U.S. Now you can see, look at. This is my comment here. Colin Kaepernick, he is at least half white. He is in fact majority white, but he chooses to identify, and he was raised by two nice white people, but he chooses to identify as Black because he has some African ancestry. And we see this in Megan Mertz as well. Megan Mertz is majority white by blood, but she chooses to identify as Black because it confers certain advantages these days. Back to Saylor. If races exist, how can somebody belong to more than one race? If extended families exist, how can you belong to your mother's extended family and to your father's extended family? How many races can you belong to? How many extended families can you belong to? Consider Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger's children. Clearly, they are part of the Schwarzenegger clan via their father and grandfather, but they are also part of the Jatterney extended family through their father's mother. Yet they also belong to the well-known liberal Catholic Shriver tribe through their mother, Maria Shriver, daughter of Sergeant Shriver, the 1972 Democratic vice presidential candidate. And they are famously Kennedys because their maternal grandmother is Eunice Kennedy Shriver, the sister of the late president. One other thing to mention with regard to Jones, that you see something happening in Canada and the United States. You see in the United States a creation of American identity. And this American identity was chiefly how would you say, the mores of people who would come from all over Europe. Black people, once identified with this, increasingly they don't. Blacks in America increasingly do not believe themselves to be Americans. They consider themselves to be Black. But yes, again, I'll just refer you to, you can find, if you just search Steve Saylor and race extended family, you'll find this a very useful essay. Let's go to the chat. Hello to Gamyan, Anaron, Head McNeck, Visionary Companion, Caligula 138, Pelcasso 88. Kevin, you did call yourself difficult the other day on Twitter. Well, yeah, but difficult has many meanings. I don't think, again, I'm not in the Chevy Chase category. If I was in the Chevy Chase category, people would be afraid of me, and they are not. But he says, Kevin, I've been very patient, but don't you think it's high time you acknowledge Jacqueline Smith's utter beauty? She's not quite peak Linda Carter, but still, I preferred Kate Jackson of the original three. Head McNeck says, E. Michael Jones has nullified himself as a thinking man. Metal Mike says the Canadian government announced they will pay for the funerals for those killed by approved vaccines. Seriously? Wow, that's reassuring, says a Metal Mike. Okay. Anrun says, did you people know that per the Hill, 75% of ICU beds in the USA are now filled because of COVID? Okay, just briefly. There was a cult of efficiency in the 1990s, part of neoliberalism, the triumph of neoliberalism. So we must eliminate surplus everywhere, just-in-time delivery and the like. And if you don't want ICU wards to be overrun, then you need to build surplus into the system. In the 1990s, it was decided to cut out the surplus in the system because having doctors and nurses sitting around not doing anything costs a lot of money. ICU wards are regularly overwhelmed during flu seasons. Palpicasso 88, yes, Jones thinks America's main ethnic groups are Jew, Catholic, and Protestant. Again, those blacks in America who are religious are typically Protestant, one could call them. That's a very broad category. About 1960, I believe about 10% of American blacks were Catholics, but that has declined enormously because Catholic is not seen as a black religion. Most blacks go to black churches, which are very different indeed from white Protestant churches. Jones has a point in 1915, says Head McNeck. Mr. Jones recounts often his beef with Sam Francis. You know that Sam Francis became a Catholic on his deathbed? I wonder if E. Michael Jones would argue that he shouldn't have been let in. Chococan 666 says 4 points shy of Mensa am I am midwit. Well, that's where I am. Exactly the same as you. Head McNeck says Jones looks like John Kerry was taken out of the oven 5 minutes late. All right. Matt Beck. This is frightfully bad stuff by E. Michael Jones. He is making traditional Catholicism look absurd. Well, yes. As I've mentioned before, if the point of Christianity was to eliminate all national differences, it would have died in Israel in the 1st century AD. SR says you can destruct the French or German nationalities too, for instance, Gauls, Goths, Bavarian, Prussian, etc., etc. Yes, I'm reminded of a famous German filmmaker, movie maker, and documentarian who will not call himself German, but insists on calling himself a Bavarian. But one can belong to more than one group, as Steve Saylor points out. SR says any identity becomes legitimate when enough people inside and outside a particular both acknowledge it as valid. Visionary Companion says Jones is often driven by personal rivalries rather than by well-reasoned objections. Head McNeck says Kevin's interview with Mr. Taylor on Grace and Steel is very enjoyable. It's still on YouTube, so enjoy. David Wright says Paul Gottfried is to blame for starting Jones on the JQ, supposedly in the offices of Chronicles. Okay, Old Major says, I stopped paying attention to Jones years ago. I agree 100% with Paul Gottfried, who says Jones is crazy. Kontiki Relais says, I would not be comfortable living in a small village with E. Michael Jones as the chief. I'm not there now, but I recall there was a mostly very positive thread on Jones at MPC. It was pretty positive, except many people pointed out that E. Michael Jones's books are exceedingly recondite. Also, they are exceedingly difficult to read. Okay, who else do we have here? Hello to John S. Red Sulfurs. David Wright. One of Jones's problems is that he is humorless. A heads up for those meeting him. I interviewed him once for a story I was writing about the third secret of Fatima. He was exceedingly brusque on the phone, to put it mildly. No Sleep Till Breezewood, PA says, if the debate was about something Jones and Taylor have strong and weak spots on, like the primacy of race versus that of religion, there would be some equal footing, but Jones is weak on biology. Is EMJ is related to Grace? Not to my knowledge. Don Willis says, I was attracted to Grace Jones back in the day. Am I gay? I don't know. I mean, you see, no, I don't think you're gay. Grace Jones was what they call striking. Back when striking didn't mean, it wasn't a euphemism for ugly. She had a really remarkable look, and her records were good as well. I knew that Hill headline was a liar, a gross exaggeration. That is a given these days, says Ann Run. Hallway medicine is nothing new to Canada, says Dan. That is true, no question about it. Back in the 1990s, when everything was going to be quantified, Adam Curtis talks about this in one of his documentaries, that they had a terrible problem in emergency rooms in Britain, as they do in Canada. So people were waiting a long time to be treated. And so some bright spark working for Tony Blair's government came up with a solution that hospitals would hire a greeter, such as they have at Walmart. So you come to the emergency room, or casualty as they call it there, and someone says, hello, I am representative of this hospital and you are such and such. And then they could say, well, we've cut that waiting time down. It's cut almost to nothing. It's just a big hoax. Enron says, wasn't she a Bond villain? She was a Bond villain. Let's get back to it here. And coincidentally, or not so coincidentally, this is a piece from American Renaissance, Gregory Hood. Look, I'll just say something about myself and being white. I didn't go around every day saying, boy, it sure is great to be white. Wow, look at all the great things that white people have done in science and literature and music, architecture, et cetera, et cetera. No, I was forced into that position by, people who hate people like me saying, we was Kangs, white people stole everything. Oh, by the way, your civilization is rubbish. And saying that 2 + 2 = 5, equals 4 all the time, well, that's white supremacism, isn't it? It's a reactive position, but many positions in life are reactive. Christianity, the term Christian began as a term of insult for them, but they ended up embracing it, and we use it today. Gregory Hood writes, it's not happening, and it's good that it is. That sums up progressives' response to the Great Replacement. The dispossession of whites in their own countries. The most recent census showed that the number of whites declined for the first time in American history. Michael Moore called this the best day ever in U.S. history. Others piled on. Mark Feinberg said, love to see it. The less white people, the better. Any other famous people here? Well, I don't know who Faraway Deb is. Well, if there are fewer whites, at least there will be fewer white supremacists. Again, if anything resembling white supremacism obtained in the United States or Canada, we wouldn't be taking all these immigrants from non-white countries, would we? We wouldn't have affirmative action, would we? We wouldn't tolerate this Black Lives Matter mayhem. I could go on. Late night talk show host Jimmy Fallon mentioned the census and pointing out the number of people went down. His audience applauded wildly. Fallon looked confused. Interesting reaction to that, he said. A new study from the Pew Research Center found that most people think white decline is neither good nor bad. However, there are exceptions. But a third of self-identified liberals think it is very good or somewhat good. A slightly lower proportion of the total population aged 18 to 29 shares this view. 1 in 4 Asians think white decline is a good thing for society. That's a higher proportion than blacks, Hispanics, and whites. Yes, model minorities, they call them. The forthright celebration of other groups' declining numbers would be considered hate on social media platforms, except in our case. Some fellow citizens really do hate us. No conversation is possible with such people, especially when they think whiteness is an evil power that is ineradicable. Others may think this is progress. White liberals have a negative bias against their own race. Some are truly broken, but most are probably not self-hating. They just have a strong distaste for white conservatives. Some data show that most Americans would be more uncomfortable with their children marrying someone of a different party than of a different race. Yes, I wonder if they're telling pollsters the truth. However, the image partisans have about their opponents is closely correlated with race. According to research from Nicholas Valentino and Kirill Zirkov, mysteriously vanished from Stanford's website but archived, partisans have developed racialized images or negative stereotypes of the other side. Judging from what liberals say about Republican voters, and not just politicians, they seem to think conservatives are dangerous and primitive. Could blacks be portrayed this way? That cartoon with a leering Steve Scalise is especially interesting. A Bernie Sanders supporting Democrat shot and badly wounded him in 2017. It was probably an attempted massacre of Republicans, but the FBI said it was suicide by cop, to Representative Scalise's fury. What white liberals seem to believe white conservatives are standing in the way of a post-racial future in which all groups will be equal. Perhaps they truly believe this will be better for white. Well, then they're idiots if they think this, because we don't hear about equality anymore. I mean, equality can't be defended in an era of affirmative action, both official and unofficial. We hear about equity now, which means that non-whites get more stuff that is taken from whites. Max Berger is quoted, "We might have a cute little apartheid interregnum and or we civil war before we achieve multiracial democracy." Where does multiracial democracy exist in the world? Hood comments, "To see what multiracial democracy means, you don't need to look at South Africa. Just see what's left of once great American cities. Many whites know what's coming. More than 1 in 4 white Americans think the demographic shift is somewhat bad or very bad. However, some journalists regard these misgivings as threatening, even dangerous." Well, we'll recall what happened in Chicago a couple of weeks ago. A female police officer was shot to death, allegedly by a black man. And it is traditional at police funerals to have mournful bagpipes. And the deputy police commissioner of Chicago said, "No, get this woman to the morgue now. I don't want to hear these bagpipes." What he's saying is, this cornball of vanilla, a cheesy Irish thing, that's not us anymore. Chicago is our city now. To see, so once again, we get an opinion piece alleging the Great Replacement is a racist conspiracy theory. This time it's Salon author Paul Rosenberg arguing that when Tucker Carlson talks about demographic change, he is promoting a crackpot notion that has fueled mass shooters. If it's a crackpot notion, Rosenberg might want to tell his own side to stop loudly celebrating it. He might want to warn Michael Moore not to say that fewer whites mean the greatest day in American history. Well, yes, going back to the beginning, and I believe it was Michael Anton who came up with this wonderful formulation, "It's not happening and it's good that it is." This is an example of what I call the Schrodinger's cat form of argumentation from the left, from the progressives, that this is definitely not happening. This definitely is happening. And it just depends on, when you look inside the box, or whether you decide to look inside the box. So how does Hood conclude? We have a twofold struggle. First, we must respectably respectfully and rationally win over those whites who don't think demographic change matters. The racial revolution of 2020 continues. Most whites are sick of hearing about race, but progressives won't let up. All whites will be forced to take sides, whether they want to or not. When forced, most will take their own side. Second, we need to organize the base that already agrees with us. Millions of white Americans are already on our side. They lacked practical goals, political representation, and ways to fight back. However, we can see the nucleus of what could be a successful resistance movement in the parents who are fighting critical race theory, young activists confronting political correctness on campus, and most important, the white advocates who continue to enter this movement knowing full well the magnitude of the opposition. This gives me faith in final victory. But don't let the census discourage you. We have the people we need, but we must act in the most effective ways we can, support our activists, never apologize, speak the truth boldly, build community, do what is necessary to be with like-minded people. The great replacement is real, but we are going to stop it, reverse it, and raise our country and civilization to its greatest heights. So who is this Max Berger fellow? Solidarity for all, he says. Previously at Justice Dems and Elizabeth Warren. Okay, so he was being ironic then. This seems to be Steve Saylor Day. Through his column at UNS, I was introduced to a piece by Ethan Strauss at House of Strauss called Nike's End of Men. And there is an absolutely incredible Nike ad called The Land of New Football, which ends with a goat up in the sky on a large rock. Strangely, is this significant? Essentially, the point of this ad is straight white people, hurry up and die. There is no future for you. Of course, Nike is an American company, but is there any such thing as an American company anymore? It's just, it's being ratioed pretty heavily in the thumbs up, thumbs down on YouTube. And I added my vote today, and I would encourage you all to add yours. Let's see, there are no borders here. Here, you can be whoever you want. Be with whoever you want. Two men kiss following that line because subtlety isn't part of this new world order. Then a woman who appears to be breastfeeding under a soccer shirt threatens in French, if you disagree. Later, a referee wearing a hijab instructs us, leave the hate, before narrator girl explains, you might as well join us because no one can stop us. Strauss comments, is that last line supposed to be inspiring? That's what a movie villain says, like if Bane took the form of Stan Marsh's sister. And again, from Steve Saylor, look, it's out in the open. It's out in the open now that the minorities, whether they are model, so-called, or not, have made it clear that we are the weak horse and we are going to be punished because there is nothing we can do about it. Miranda Dew, Hassan Kanu, Ahalan Ahru Lanatham, Benjamin Gonzalez O'Brien, and Kelly Little Hernandez explain why it's bad for American citizens named Smith and Jones to have a say in immigration policy. Once again, one must ask if America or Canada or England is such a horrible place, why are they there? Surely their native countries or the native countries of their parents have much need of their intelligence and skill. This is quite amusing to me. Speaking of the Irish, this is from Fox Sports. Notre Dame gives fiery defense of leprechaun mascot after survey deems it offensive. And there is a picture of a black man, I guess in Indiana, dressed in a green suit, holding the Notre Dame flag. Yes, a leprechaun, the fighting Irish. Well, why are they fighting? Because they're Irish, because they're drunks or whatever. It doesn't bother me in the slightest. I know that there are some people of Irish descent who were exceedingly effeminate about this. Years ago, William F. Buckley Jr. apologized because he had described the late Tip O'Neill as sirloin-faced. Some Irish American whined, "Oh, I shouldn't have used that term." Well, no, typically Irish faces come in two types. There is the skull, which you can see in the face of Robert Kennedy, and sirloin-faced, like Brian Burke, the hockey coach and commentator, and Tip O'Neill. Just check out and see. Let's talk about laughter in the dark, by which I mean the Biden administration and Afghanistan. Bruce Bauer writes in American Greatness, "Damn you all, you're American citizens with the right to vote in presidential elections. For 4 years, we had a president who, over the course of a single term, managed to undo a great deal of the mischief wrought and a great many of the mistakes made by his recent predecessors. Trump revived America's economy, shored up Americans' individual liberties, forged several remarkable peace agreements, and greatly strengthened our international position, thus firmly checking the ambitions of our powerful adversaries. But Biden voters, he had a personality that rubbed you the wrong way. He wrote nasty tweets. In the language of TV production, he was too hot. You wanted cool. The Democrats put up a candidate who was plainly in mental decline. It was obvious every time he spoke. But you didn't pay terribly close attention to his speeches. The sources from which you get your news carefully clipped out all of the bits of his appearances in which his befuddlement was manifest. If you heard someone speak out against his senility, you dismissed the charges out of hand. Biden also had a less than stellar professional history. He'd spent decades in the Senate as little more than a fixture, an empty suit, a vapid, smiling shill for the credit card companies and other corporations based in his shabby little state. In the lead up to the 2020 election, mountains of evidence were made public, indicating that Biden was even more deeply corrupt than we already knew, taking massive bribes from nefarious foreign powers. Yes, that story was banned from social media. Still, you could have known about it if you'd had the slightest bit of curiosity and the slightest sense of civic responsibility. If you'd really been paying attention, you would have had to have noticed some of this. Well, they're getting what they wanted. And this is from Emily Gooden at the Daily Mail. President Joe Biden on Wednesday joked with an NBC reporter about the evacuation in Afghanistan as thousands, including many Americans, struggle to get out of the war-torn country as the Taliban takes over. Is this the time for Wisecracks Joe? The Mail asks. Snarky president. Yes. Biden, after he made remarks at Cybersecurity Summit featuring several prominent business executives, was asked by NBC's Peter Alexander what he would do if Americans are still in Afghanistan after the August 31st deadline to withdraw U.S. troops. "You'll be the first person I call," Biden joked in response. Is that really a joke? Is it? It's just typical of Biden's nastiness. Now, there is a nasty side to Donald Trump, no question, but there is also a nice or even jovial side to him. And there is no such side to Joe Biden. As the English would say, he is all side. Just an exceedingly nasty man. White House Press Secretary not Jennifer, but Jen Psaki, defended Biden's remarks, pointing out the president has given numerous updates and gotten many briefings on the situation in Afghanistan. He has also highlighted the fact that we are closely following the threats from ISIS, she said at her daily press briefing. Up to 1,500 Americans are waiting to be evacuated, Secretary of State Tony Blinken said on Wednesday. So America's Secretary of State is called Tony now. Again from the Mail. Up to 1,500 Americans, including 24 California school students, are still stuck in Afghanistan. Blinken blames citizens for not leaving earlier as CIA and U.S. helicopters start conducting missions to get everyone out. Well, why are students in Afghanistan, students from California, people taking vacations in Afghanistan? But the Biden administration could do what many governments do in situations like this, saying, we are asking you to leave now, because we may not be in a position to guarantee your safety if conditions worsen. And this normally persuades everyone but an idiot that it's time to get the hell out now. And this is from Steve Watson at Summit News. Just when it seemed the Biden administration's Afghanistan debacle couldn't get any worse, the State Department texted a final message for Americans stranded in the country Tuesday, alerting them that they would be without assistance, and then deleted the warning just minutes later. Biden isn't fit for the role. He's gone gaga. Tory MPs join U.S. Republicans in condemning President's Afghanistan betrayal as UK races to get last 2,000 people out in 24 hours, while America blames its citizens for not leaving earlier. Yes, the special relationship. This is from Sophia Kai at Bloomberg. U.S. tells refugee aid groups to get ready for 50,000 Afghans. How many translators were there? Did they have 2 translators for every serviceman in Afghanistan? Is that how it worked? 50,000. This is from Kane at Citizen Free Press. Joe Biden's administration is planning to bring 50,000 Afghans to the United States who do not have visas and who have not completed their immigration processing. Biden will use the little-known humanitarian parole tool. The plan is a last-minute effort to bring in as many Afghans to the U.S. as possible, as this group does not have special immigrant visas, P2 visas, or refugee status. 50,000, not enough, apparently. According to John Binder at Breitbart, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says President Joe Biden's administration must resettle at least 200,000 Afghans across the United States as part of its withdrawal from Afghanistan. I believe we need to move, and the administration needs to move as quickly as possible and as expansively as possible, ensuring that we're raising the amount of refugee visas to whatever amount is necessary. I would say the rock bottom is 200,000, but I think it should be whatever is necessary. Necessary according to whom? There are billions of people who live in what Donald Trump liked to call shitholes all over the world. Is it the duty of the United States to take in all of them? It wouldn't be the United States anymore, would it? This is from Jordan Davidson at The Federalist. Only about 5% of the people the United States have evacuated from Afghanistan are Americans seeking safe passage home. More than 82,300 have been airlifted from Kabul since the government's collapse nearly 2 weeks ago. But the Pentagon says that as of Wednesday, only 4,400 Americans were rescued in those evacuation operations. So it's going to be a lot more than 50,000. When they say Americans, what does that mean? Does that mean someone who is an Afghan, who managed to procure American citizenship for some reason and then went back to Afghanistan? These are paper citizens. And I'm sure that the vast majority of the so-called Americans who will be extracted from Afghanistan are simply paper citizens. Why do we want this? Why do we want these people here? Is it going to be good for us? Apparently, that is not a question that we are allowed to ask. So let's, how are these people, how have they fared in Denmark, say? Average rape convictions per 100,000 people per country of origin, Denmark, aggregate 2010 to 2014. Denmark, 0.7. Iraq, 10.4. Iran, 10.7. Lebanon, 10.7. Afghanistan, hang on. Afghanistan is what? Is 16.3, is it? And at the top is Somalia at 20, over 25. Over 25. So the Afghans then are not the worst, but they are a very solid runner-up. We believe that women shouldn't be sexually harassed, molested, raped, gang raped, right? We believe that, don't we? That was my understanding. But going back to the Schrodinger's cat thing, oh, yes, men are wicked. Toxic masculinity. Well, if you're looking for toxic masculinity, Afghanistan and Somalia are right at the top of the league rankings. Yeah, but we don't want to talk about it when they exercise this toxic masculinity physically on women, because that would be Islamophobic, racist, white supremacist. I have argued in the past that the conspiracy theory that Joe Biden was going to be ushered out, shortly after he became president, certainly within his first year, that there's serious problems with this, because a great many people would come to the conclusion that they were sold a bill of goods last November, that the intention was always to make Kamala Harris president, but Kamala Harris is too unpopular to beat even Donald Trump. And I think that there could be widespread civic unrest if this stunt is tried. Paul Bedard reports in the Washington Examiner, America, just doesn't have a good feeling about Vice President Kamala Harris. Going back 28 years in NBC polling, no other new vice president has been welcomed so coldly by Americans as the Democrat and first woman in the job. In the latest survey, pollster Bill McInturf pointed out her low positive rating at 37%. 37%. Wow. Let's look at previous ones. Al Gore, 47%. Dick Cheney, 48%. Joe Biden, 38%. Mike Pence, 38%. Kamala Harris, 37%. Joe Biden, he's never been popular nationally in the United States, which is a part of the mystery of how this man managed to be elected president. The total mystery. And from the national interest in 2017, again, this is Steve Saylor Day. I've worked with refugees for decades. Europe's Afghan crime wave is mind-boggling. Afghans stand out among the refugees committing crimes in Austria and elsewhere. See, it's not just Denmark. Why? By Cheryl Bernard. Cheryl Bernard is an Austrian-born academic. She is the wife of Afghanistan-born U.S. diplomat Zalmay Khalilzad, who was U.S. ambassador to Afghanistan under G.W. Bush. She writes, there was one development that had not been expected and was not tolerable: a large and growing incidence of sexual assaults committed by refugees against local women. These were not of the cultural misunderstanding date rape sort, but were vicious, no preamble attacks on random girls and women, often committed by gangs or packs of young men. At first, the incidents were downplayed or hushed up. No one wanted to provide the right wing with fodder for nationalist agitation, and the hope was that these were isolated instances caused by a small problem group of outliers. Most of the assaults were being committed by refugees of one particular nationality, by Afghans. Again, we definitely want as many of these people as possible in our countries. Trudeau has committed Canada to taking in 20,000. So what's going to be the result? I guess you can look to what's going on in the streets of Toronto and Montreal now, or the streets of London. This is from Katie Weston at the Daily Mail. This is the shocking moment an Orthodox Jewish man is struck in the face with a bottle in the fourth alleged hate attack by the same assailant just hours apart in North London. Footage shows the 30-year-old victim being hit on the head by a man wearing Islamic clothing on a street in Stamford Hill at around 6:40 p.m. last Wednesday. A separate video taken shortly afterwards shows a 14-year-old boy on a bicycle being assaulted without warning in the same area at 7:10 p.m. And at 8:30 p.m., a 64-year-old grandfather was left unconscious after being punched in the face while walking to a synagogue, suffering facial injuries and a broken foot. All three of the victims are Jewish, said police, who are linking the incidents and treating them as hate crimes. Officers have been informed of a fourth victim who has yet to contact police, added the force, with inquiries to identify them ongoing. It is understood that this attack took place on the same evening. As I've said before, I would say that 99%, 99.9% of Afghans have never even seen a Jew, but that doesn't stop them from hating them intensely. And in Canadian news, this is a strange looking woman with her dyed hair. When you have sallow colored skin, dyeing your hair blonde is not a good idea. This is from the Canadian Press. The federal Greens have nominated a candidate in Nova Scotia who was turfed by the NDP in the last national campaign after a tweet surfaced in which she had compared Israel to Nazi Germany. So what would be the ethnicity of this woman? Oh, she's called Rana Zaman. How about that? Now, when it was reported that synagogues in Toronto had been defaced recently with Nazi swastikas, and two Jewish liberal candidates in Montreal, their signs had been defaced with swastikas, the media didn't point out what everyone knows, that the group that associates Israel with Nazi Germany, they're Muslims. And I suppose some of their Antifa allies. Oh, yes. We have a very strange cabinet in my country. Gotta make it diverse. We end up with people who are just not fit for purpose. There is a woman, a cabinet minister. Her name is Maryam Monsef, and it would appear, the evidence is pretty strong, that she is in my country. She and her mother are in my country illegally. The evidence is also very strong. She lied about her place of birth for years and years and years. She was, in 2014, I believe it was, she sold everything that she owned where she lived in Peterborough, Ontario, and was planning to move to Afghanistan for a job. What kind of jobs are there in Afghanistan? People from Canada, people who glow in the dark, perhaps? Excuse me. By Sarah Turnbull at CTV News. Canada's Minister of Women and Gender Equality says her mention of the Taliban as, quote, our brothers, unquote, during a press conference Wednesday is a cultural reference after receiving criticism for a choice of language. Maryam Monsef, who was born in Iran and raised in Afghanistan, had a direct message for the terrorist group, which has swiftly taken control of most of Afghanistan since the U.S. began withdrawing its troops following a 20-year mission. Quote, I want to take this opportunity to speak with our brothers, the Taliban. We call on you to ensure the safe and secure passage of any individual in Afghanistan out of the country. We call on you to immediately stop the violence, the genocide, the femicide, the destruction of infrastructure, including heritage buildings, unquote. When asked later if the term brothers reflected a softening of the government's approach to the Taliban, she responded, hardly. The reference to brothers is a cultural reference, of course, but let me be very clear. We do not support the Taliban. We are horrified. The hard-won gains of the past 20 years are at stake. This was a woman who was given charge of the electoral reform brief by Justin Trudeau, and she botched it so completely that Trudeau simply dropped the notion of electoral reform. Yes, I like first past the post. So that was a good thing. Let us return to Joseph Tainter and his collapse of complex societies. And he's talking about what happens. What are the characteristics of a complex society that has collapsed? What populations remain in urban or other political centers reuse existing architecture in a characteristic manner. There is little new construction, and that which is attempted concentrates on adapting existing buildings. Great rooms will be subdivided, flimsy facades are built, and public space will be converted to private. While some attempt may be made to carry on an attenuated version of previous ceremonialism, the former monuments are allowed to fall into decay. People may reside in upper story rooms as lower ones deteriorate. Monuments are often mined as easy sources of building materials. When a building begins to collapse, the residents simply move to another. Palaces and central storage facilities may be abandoned, along with centralized redistribution of goods and foodstuffs or market exchange. Both long-distance and local trade may be markedly reduced, and craft specialization end or decline. Subsistence and material needs comes to be met largely on the basis of local self-sufficiency. Declining regional interaction leads to the establishment of local styles in items such as pottery that formerly had been widely circulated. Both portable and fixed technology, e.g. hydraulic engineering systems, revert to simpler forms that can be developed and maintained at the local level without the assistance of a bureaucracy that no longer exists. Whether as cause or as consequence, there is typically a marked, rapid reduction in population size and density. Not only do urban populations substantially decline, but so also do the support populations of the countryside. Many settlements are concurrently abandoned. The level of population and settlement may decline to that of centuries or even millennia previously. Some simpler collapsing societies, like the Ik, clearly do not possess these features of complexity. Collapse for them entails loss of the common elements of band or tribal social structure, lineages and clans, reciprocity and other kin obligations, village political structure, relations of respect and authority, and constraints on non-sociable behavior. For such people, collapse has surely led to the survival of the fittest situation, although as Turnbull emphasizes, this is but a logical adjustment to their desperate circumstances. In a complex society that has collapsed, it would thus appear the overarching structure that provides support services to the population loses capability or disappears entirely. No longer can the populace rely upon external defense and internal order, maintenance of public works, or delivery of food and material goods. Organization reduces to the lowest level that is economically sustainable, so that a variety of contending polities exist where there had been peace and unity. Remaining populations must become locally self-sufficient to a degree not seen for several generations. Groups that had formerly been economic and political partners now become strangers, even threatening competitors. The world, as seen from any locality, perceptibly shrinks, and over the horizon lies the unknown. Given this pattern, it is a small wonder that collapse is feared by so many people today. Even among those who decry the excesses of industrial society, the possible end of that society must surely be seen as catastrophic. Whether collapse is universally a catastrophe, though, is an uncertain matter. This point will be raised again in the concluding chapter. And we move on. We'll move on tomorrow to the nature of complex societies. Again, this is Joseph Tainter, in a book published by Cambridge University Press in 1988. I know people were complaining yesterday of what the black pilling on COVID-19, and I understand your concern. So I bumped it down in the schedule today. But since this is literally the most important story on Earth and it shows no sign of disappearing, I feel that I must needs a comment on it. And let's start with Kate Brown, the governor of Oregon. I always check to see where these politicians were born. And increasingly, I find out, no, they do not represent areas that they grew up with. And Kate Brown is no exception. Born in 1960 in Spain, where her father was in the United States Air Force, she grew up in Minnesota, and she was educated in Minnesota as far as a BA, Bachelor of Arts, in environmental conservation with a certificate in women's studies. How about that? How about that? And she is, of course, America's first bisexual governor, whatever that means, because I cannot imagine any man or woman having sexual relations with her. although she supposedly has a husband called Dan Little, and of course, she has no natural children. This is from Jordan Davidson at The Federalist. Oregon Governor Kate Brown has just joined the ranks of Democrats proudly turning back to their old tyrannical COVID-19 ways by mandating masks outdoors on top of already requiring them inside. According to Brown's newest requirements, Oregonians, regardless of their vaccination status, are now required to wear face coverings outside when they can't be socially distanced. Exceptions to the rule include children under 5 years old, homeless people living outdoors, no matter how much or little physical distance is between them, and people playing sports or giving a speech or performance. Brown previously lifted practically all statewide restrictions on June 30th, including mask and social distancing requirements, making counties responsible for ensuring local public health. Before that, Oregon health officials had sought to make the state's mask mandates permanent. Now, however, the governor claims mandating masks is necessary to protect the public and keep Oregon citizens safe. The Delta variant is spreading fast and wide, throwing our state into a level of crisis we have not yet seen in the pandemic. Brown said in a statement, cases and hospitalizations are at a record high. Masks are a quick and simple tool we can immediately deploy to protect ourselves and our families and quickly help stop further spread of COVID-19. Then why haven't they done so? Why haven't lockdowns done so? Mark Hemingway comments there were shootouts on the streets of Portland last week between Antifa and Proud Boys, in part because last year Oregon outlawed use of non-lethal crowd control such as pepper gas. Cops have no legal immunity if they use it, but Brown considers this a public safety issue. While Brown claims masking has, quote, proven to be effective at bringing case counts down and are a necessary measure right now, even in some outdoor settings to help fight COVID and protect one another, unquote, the science is shaky. Indeed. And, terrifying milestone. And when I was looking, I was forced to look at pictures of of the governor of Oregon, Kate Brown. I was reminded of a movie character and a name, Frau Farbissina. And of course, actually, I only learned this a couple of weeks ago. A Jewish correspondent of mine used this word, which quite delighted me. And the word in its female form, Farbissina, it means sourpuss, embittered, loud, unpleasant, a scold. So this would be the perfect a word to use to describe the governor of Oregon. Once again, first bisexual governor, Oregon, first in the nation. This is from Andrea Blanco from the Daily Mail. Washington school is blasted for making student athletes wear ankle monitors so they can be alerted if another player tests positive for COVID. It's about sadism now. That's what it is come down to. This is from Sean Fleetwood at The Federalist. A recently published study from the Centers for Disease Control shows that there is no scientific rationale for forcibly masking school children. The study's publication simultaneously vindicates Florida Republican Governor Ron DeSantis, who's been a vocal opponent of the policy due to its lack of scientific evidence. While analyzing more than 90,000 elementary school students in 169 Georgia schools from November 16th to December 11th last year, the study found that schools that, quote, required mask use among students was not statistically significant compared with schools where mask use was optional. There is a piece at the American Thinker by Thomas T. Seiler, MD, and it's called The Good News, a COVID-19 Update. Now that we have 18 months to slow the spread, it is time to take stock of the pandemic. We have learned many good things that our media and our pandemic managers rarely report. Most fundamentally, we do not need to be afraid of COVID-19 anymore. The media and some government health authorities are still pushing hysteria and fear, but that should not prevail. Let's look at the good news that can calm our fears. There'll be time at a later date to look at the bad and the ugly of the resolving pandemic. Globally, the survival rate for COVID-19 is 99.8%. Under the age of 70, the survival rate for COVID-19 is 99.97%. And I'll just mention that the media is just chock full of vaccine skeptics now have COVID, ooh, and they are suffering. And I look at the pictures and they're all the same. A very fat man is on a hospital bed, but the media does not want to remind us or alert us to the very strong correlation between obesity and COVID-19, particularly serious COVID-19 symptoms. Dr. Seiler continues, herd immunity for the alpha strain is here. 67% of the American population have had at least one COVID-19 vaccination. The official number of cases is about 10% of the population, but several antibody studies show that the percentage of those with natural immunity is 4 to 6 times higher. Dr. Marty McCary, a Johns Hopkins professor, estimates that 80 to 85% of the population is immune from natural immunity and vaccination. The average age of death from COVID is 78. And there's a paragraph about treatment here, which I will not mention because it will get me banned from YouTube, but you can find this at americanthinker.com. Children are safe from COVID-19 and don't spread the virus either. A study in the UK showed that the survival rate in children is 99.995%. In the US, 335 children have died since the start of the pandemic. A study done by Johns Hopkins and Fair Health showed that all of the children that died from April 2020 to August 2020 had immune problems or were chronically ill. In that period, not one healthy child died. Sweden did not have a lockdown or mask mandate and did better with cases and deaths than many countries. Persons who have had COVID-19 infection have a robust and long-lasting immunity. This immunity is also likely to protect against variants. There is very little, if any, spread of COVID-19 from asymptomatic persons. The death rate nationally for COVID-19 has been going down since January. The Delta variant is acting like a typical historical virus variant. Typically, variants happen all the time and are more contagious but less deadly. We do not need to be afraid of COVID-19 anymore. Let's begin to end the hysteria and fear. The worst is over, and we are transitioning to endemic status, which means a low level of cases and deaths. Story from Jeff Cox at CNBC. The economy could be getting help from positive news on the Delta variant. If the recovery is going to continue, it will need Delta to fade, and there are signs that the tide might be turning, albeit slowly. Delta is really just causing a loss of momentum rather than pronounced economic weakness, and there is good chance that it will be pretty short-lived, said Jefferies economist Anita Markowska. This is, again, from the Daily Mail, from Luke Andrews. 2 COVID vaccine doses become noticeably less effective at stopping infections within 6 months, a major study of Pfizer and AstraZeneca's jabs have found. Researchers warned Britons prioritized for the vaccines last winter, including the elderly, could see protection plummet to just 50% by winter without boosters. The Real World study, led by King's College London, analyzed PCR results for more than 1 million people who had been fully vaccinated to look for breakthrough infections. This is from Thomas Lifson, or Lifeson, I don't know how it's pronounced, an American thinker. Pfizer CEO acknowledges vaccine-resistant strains of COVID likely coming. The big problem with vaccines and viruses is that viruses tend to mutate into strains that are resistant to the vaccine. It's called ADE, antibody-dependent enhancement, and it is why no effective coronavirus vaccine had ever been developed prior to the current pandemic. From the Journal of Infection, August the 9th, in the case of the Delta variant, neutralizing antibodies have a decreased affinity for the spike protein, whereas facilitating antibodies display a strikingly increased affinity. Thus, ADE may be a concern for people receiving vaccines based on the original Wuhan strain spike sequence, either mRNA or viral vectors. Under these circumstances, second-generation vaccines with spike protein formulations lacking structurally conserved ADE-related epitopes should be considered. And of course, the booster that we're all hearing so much about, well, the first of the boosters, because there will be more to come, it's just more of the same. This is from Lolita Baldor at Associated Press. Military troops must immediately begin to get the COVID-19 vaccine, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said in a memo Wednesday, ordering service leaders to impose ambitious timelines for implementation. And I wonder how much resistance that we are going to see to this. Another piece from the Federalist, this one by Tristan Justice. South Florida doctors want you to know they're upset with the careers they've chosen. On Monday, a group of 75 physicians staged a protest over unvaccinated COVID patients seeking hospital care. We are exhausted, Dr. Rupesh Daria of Palm Beach Internal Medicine told a local NBC affiliate. Our patients and resources are running low. Well, it appears no patients were denied treatment from the group staging this week's demonstration yet. Doctors elsewhere have taken the leap to refuse care for those who decline to vaccinate themselves from COVID-19. Jason Valentine said, I cannot and will not force anyone to take the vaccine. I also cannot continue to watch my patients suffer and die from an eminently preventable disease. Tristan Justice asked, will Valentine treat people who are obese? What about those suffering complications from drug addiction? Smokers, STDs, HIV, diabetes 2, liver disease, mouth cancer, lung cancer, hepatitis. An aggressively healthy lifestyle can prevent all of the above. When reached for comment, Valentine's office simply hung up. And, oh yes, let's get some data here from the government of British Columbia. As mentioned yesterday, I go out once a week to a patio a couple miles from here, have a couple of beers, have a sandwich and a salad. And starting September 13th, I'm not going to be allowed to do that anymore because I am not fully vaccinated. And today starting today, I have to wear a mask again everywhere indoors. I live in British Columbia, of course, but I live in a rather peculiar part. It's an island called Vancouver Island, and about 800,000 people live there. How many deaths have we had total of COVID-19, from COVID-19 or of COVID-19 on Vancouver Island since what? January, February of 2020? Let's see, February, March, April, May, June, July, August. That would be 7 plus 12, which would be 19. Okay. 43 divided by 19. And just to be extra accurate here, I'm going to use a calculator. And what does that mean? It means 2.26 people on average have died of COVID-19 on every month. Less than 3 people a month. But we all need to be double vaccinated and wear masks in all indoor spaces, including patios, which by definition are not indoor spaces. Again, it's all about the sadism. News from the new governor of New York. This is from WIVB in Buffalo. Oh, originally from the Associated Press. New York Governor Kathy Hochul, I don't know if that's how it's pronounced, promised more government transparency on her first day in office, and by day's end, her administration had quietly delivered it by acknowledging that there were nearly 12,000 more deaths in the state from COVID-19 than had been publicized by her predecessor, Andrew Cuomo. New York now reports that nearly 55,400 people have died of COVID-19 in New York based on death certificate data submitted to the CDC, up from about 43,400 that Governor Cuomo had reported to the public as of Monday, his last day in office. Yeah, cover up of all of those nursing home deaths that Cuomo is responsible for. From Jack Newman from the Daily Mail, New Zealand and Australia are continuing to experience a surge in COVID cases despite their draconian lockdown measures, which have proved powerless to prevent the contagious Delta variant. New Zealand recorded another 62 community cases, with another in an isolation facility, in the largest single-day jump of the latest outbreak. It comes after Jacinda Ardern decided to extend lockdown measures this week in response to rising cases as her zero COVID policy becomes undone day by day. Lockdowns don't work. But is this a female thing? I'm wondering. Because if you go on Twitter, for example, I don't know how representative Twitter is of the general population. It's certainly representative of people in the general population who have strong opinions about political issues. Kate Brown decides to force people to wear masks outdoors. Men, women. Oh, thank you, Kate. Thank you. Bonnie Henry decides to force everyone to be vaccinated and not be able to go to so-called non-essential businesses, even sit on patios, also goes back to masking, and men shake their fist and women say, thank you, Bonnie, but could you have done this earlier? Could you have taken away our freedoms earlier? Rebecca Weiser has a piece in The Spectator Australia, which is a very good lead paragraph. The problem with Australians isn't that so many of them are descended from convicts, Clive James once said, but that so many are descended from prison officers. Australia has astounded the world with its draconian corona confinement. Nowhere else on the planet outside of the communist collectives are people prevented from leaving their country or returning home. Not everyone, of course. Despite the sanctimonious saw that we are all in this together, we are not. Cricketers, movie stars, ministers of the crown, mining moguls, and the demi-monde of reality TV types are free to come and go, flying in and out on private or publicly owned jets and isolating in the comfort of their pads or palazzos. The rest of us are locked in, locked out, locked up, or locked down. Take me to the April sun in Cuba, went the rock song of the 70s. These days, it's almost as hard to get in or out of Queensland. In Victoria, Melburnians must wait until Sunday for the Premier to deign to disclose the no doubt long walk to freedom. In the meantime, he demands that parliamentarians give him unfettered emergency powers for another 6 months. Hopeful Peace in American Greatness by Dan Galernter. It's called Just Say No. If America is to enjoy a new birth of freedom, it starts with those Americans who believe that there are some things more important than safety, some things dearer even than life. In 2021, the world takes stock of its freedom and finds out just how little is left. In Australia, Melbourne has been locked down for 19 months, and the police are shooting violators with rubber bullets. In New Zealand, citizens testing positive for COVID-19 were quarantined by force in government camps run by the military. I cannot allow the gains that we have all made to be squandered by processes that are not followed, said New Zealand's Prime Minister. In Great Britain, the National Health Service built an app that pings people who have been near a person with a positive COVID test and requires those people to leave work. Last month, the app was pinging more than 500,000 people every week. Boris Johnson's spokesman said the app is doing what it's designed to do. In America, New Yorkers will not be allowed indoors anywhere, no bars, restaurants, museums, movie theaters, gyms, without their key to NYC proof of vaccination. This despite the fact that the vaccine only inhibits one from developing symptoms, but does not at all affect the likelihood of having the virus in one's system or passing it to others. This year, much of the world discovered that its freedom was illusory. Nothing more than words and slogans to soothe the credulous, feeble public. But not in Florida, where I happen to be at the moment. When Key to NYC was announced by Bill de Blasio, I knew it was the right time to visit some friends in the South and see how the other half lives. And down here, under the calm guidance of the best governor in America by far, and with no masks, no restrictions of any sort whatsoever, life is free and normal. The press reports a high number of COVID cases in Florida without showing the inconvenient truth that despite the number of people testing positive, the outcomes are extremely good. Hospitalizations are rare and deaths exceptionally so, despite the Mayo Clinic's estimate that only half the people down here are vaccinated. And he concludes, a people disarmed is a people enslaved not only by their lacking effective means of resistance, but by having shown their willingness to surrender those means to the authorities. When you look at American states with the freest gun laws, you know you're looking at states with the freest people. Not simply because these people have guns, but because they had the strength of character to keep them. They were the ones who, when the government came around to lock them in their homes, said no. If America is to enjoy a new birth of freedom, as I believe it will, it starts with those Americans who believe there are some things more important than safety, some things dearer even than life. To those in less fortunate circumstances and places, it may fall to you to take the first step towards freedom regained. The government will ask you for your papers. You know what to say. It occurs to me, if safety is the highest virtue, then all the People's Republic of China has to do is to say to the United States of America, you will surrender to us, or we will attack you with nuclear weapons. The same people clamoring for masks and vaccine passports are going to say, yeah, maybe we could win that war, but how many people would die? It is unacceptable. So we better get busy with surrendering. I have no doubt that would be the result from the same people that I see mewling on Twitter every day. Let's have a quick look at the Daily Skeptic, former lockdown skeptics. It was called, "A few 100,000 of most vulnerable will get third doses." The UK government's expert advisors are expected to recommend third jabs for people with severely weakened immune systems this week or the next. We can't afford another winter in the grip of COVID fear. With new data showing the damage done by lockdown, the government must base future policy on a rational assessment of risk, writes Dr. Stephen Davis in The Telegraph. Refuse to get jabbed, pay $200 health insurance surcharge each month, Delta Airlines tells staff. Government plans to vaccinate 12-year-olds. When will Neil Ferguson admit he got it wrong? Let's see. We're publishing another critique today, this one by Glenn Bishop, of the new paper in Nature by Neil Ferguson and others, claiming that a lockdown in Sweden would have resulted in a 2- to 4-fold reduction in mortality. Hard to credit they're still banging this drum, given that Ferguson's team originally predicted the absence of a lockdown in Sweden would have resulted in up to 90,000 deaths by July 2020. The real number was 5,370. Research on the COVID origins has stalled, scientists warn. I believe it's stalled permanently by design. And I don't know, this is kind of a swings and roundabouts story. This one, more than 500,000 young adults started smoking to help cope with stressful first lockdown. 500,000 Britons. It's an impressive number, seems to me. And let us have a look at Alex Berenson's Twitter feed. I say these numbers from Israel about breakthrough, they are quite distressing. Wow. New Israeli preprint shows natural immunity to SARS-CoV-2 is far superior to the artificial kind. Vaccinated people were 13 times as likely to be infected and 27 times more likely to have symptomatic infections as a matched cohort that was previously infected. And this is with Delta dominant. 2, the paper also shows that offering previously infected people one dose slightly reduced their infection risk, though not enough to outweigh side effects, I would argue. Along with other emerging data, this paper should end any debate over vaccines versus natural immunity. Berenson writes, look, FDA lawyers and staffers must have kicked up a huge fuss to force this agency into this Rube Goldberg nonsense. I know you're out there. Find me. Riddle me this. If a vaccine has full FDA approval but is not available, how fast does its efficacy reach zero? This is in reaction to breaking news. Texas Governor Greg Abbott bans COVID-19 vaccine mandates for government entities, regardless of whether the vaccines have full FDA approval. And, oh yes, San Francisco was mentioned earlier in the show, invented the wonderful term anarcho-tyranny. That is to say that the authorities do nothing about various outrages, but they crack down on things in which they should have no interest. This is from Vivek Chowdhury and James Gant from the Daily Mail. So much for the police crackdown. Extinction Rebellion shuts down Oxford Circus again as eco-mob re-erect giant pink table in middle of London's busiest shopping district, while officers just stand and watch. That's what they did a few days ago in the police. They're absolutely useless. You know, I suppose if the government of Britain decided that it needed a Twitter police or a social media police, then it could form a separate body. But it seems to me the best thing to do with the Metropolitan Police perhaps would be to fire them all and start from scratch. And, okay, let's have a look at the chat here. Polygon says COVID-19 is our generation's Salem witch trials or satanic panic. Oh, it's much worse than the Salem witch trials or satanic panic. Brandon Smith says, makes me wonder if Nero was as bad as the history books may have been lying about. Polygons, yes, except on a global and psychotic scale. I'm sure they're sitting on even more underhanded things they could be doing, but might still in the future, says Brandon Smith. Jeffrey Pye says, I feel a certain vibe coming on here in La Belle Ville. We have been in face diapers from birth, it feels. Stay tough, tinned goods, and exercise. Extinction Rebellion equals foot soldiers for corporate CEOs, says Polygons. There's a woman who the Daily Mail delights in showing pictures of, who were displaying her very large fake breasts. I mean, they're obviously fake. You know, no effects of gravity. And she has little decals on her nipples. And so apparently it's acceptable to show these pictures in a newspaper because she's not really nude. Oh, okay, if you say so. And hello to Oscar Toe and Leponius Maximus Meridius. And the basic divide in the West are those who watch TV and those who don't, says Polygons. Separate. Humans must separate, says Steve. When do we get to biological Chernobyl? Asked Brandon Smith. Yes, it was a reference to, what was it, the Delta variant? Was it even the Delta variant or the Alpha variant being a biological Fukushima? Man, that just sounds... That sounds like bad news. Absolute bad news. Of course, it's not. Polygon says, ironically, the former Warsaw Pact countries will be the ones who carry on the torch of Western civilization and, more importantly, Christianity. Urban Planner says, in Iraq, I witnessed former government buildings being hammered to bits by hand to recover the metal reinforcement bar from the concrete. Yes, the rebar, as it's called. I was always curious as to why, you know, when they have these disasters, say in Bangladesh, right? Why are these apartment buildings just reduced to rubble, right? Earthquakes, apartment buildings reduced to rubble. That doesn't happen in California, say. And then I learned the reason why. Because in the third world, they typically use concrete without rebar. And I guess you don't want to live in one of these buildings if your area is disaster prone, and of course much of the world is disaster prone. Ashimane Bravo says Tom Luongo said that the Davos elites will decide relatively soon that Joe Biden is unfit to be president and will also get rid of Kamala and install Janet Yellen as president. But doesn't Nancy Pelosi come next after Kamala? Janet Yellen. They really want a revolution, don't they? They really want a revolution. Well, I do care about the guy in North London. This is my response to Leponius Maximus Meridius. I do not think that it is useful in our immigration policy to import large numbers of people who insist on dragging their parochial concerns to our formerly peaceful countries. Leponius says Bangladeshi engineers are top-notch, Kevin. And I wanted to talk about art rock, which is an interesting, not to be confused with rock art, Wikipedia reminds me. Yes, thank you for that. Art rock is a genre of music that I suppose you could say has disappeared, and it was popular even from when the 1960s into perhaps into the 1980s. I mean, obviously, Radiohead could be described accurately as an art rock band. I mean, they started off as a guitar band, and then their music got more complicated, and then they discovered, Can, and their music changed again. They continued to sell well, but I suppose the first art rock band was the Beatles. Now, not all of the Beatles songs were art rock, but Revolution Number 9 certainly is. Tomorrow Never Knows certainly is. But the Beatles were able to get away with doing all kinds of music. Stuff like Get Back. We've gotten too far. We have to pull back. Of course, I'm reminded of the hilarious Channel 4's Star Stories. You've been warned. It's scabrous in language and content about Paul McCartney and Heather Mills, where there's an imagined scene in the 1960s where Paul McCartney asks John Lennon, "Where's your tool?" "My tool," he says, and McCartney is holding a kosh, as they call it, and he bashes John Lennon over the head many times. "Oh no, he's dead." "No, I'm not dead." "Who's your daddy?" he shouts at him. "Who's your daddy?" And Lennon says, "I am." And he says, "Are you challenging me as leader of the Beatles, you specky twat?" "No, no." And he says, "From now on, the Beatles will record only jaunty, whimsical, Edwardian ditties." I don't think that When I'm 64, say, could be considered to be art rock. But I suppose essential to what is art rock is a certain pretension. That is to say, a pretension to musical expertise or a pretension to lyrical expertise. Lyrically, moving beyond Moon June Spoon, say. Musically moving beyond 145. But then, of course, there are no hard rules about this because it's one of the most famous art rock bands, the Velvet Underground. Sister Ray is a 2-chord modal jam that goes on for 17 minutes. The 1970s were the heydays of art rock, and you had companies, record labels like Island and Harvest and others, which Virgin originally was an art rock label. It's hard to imagine a group like Slap Happy, Dagmar Krause, Peter Blackvad, and Anthony Moore getting a record deal from what was then even then a major label, but they did. 70s there was considerable experimentation in music in the 1970s. I would disagree that a group like Emerson, Lake and Palmer, or Cumbersome Fake and Trauma, as the New Musical Express used to call them, I don't think this is art rock. It's bombast. It's classically informed bombast. Again, you see with Yes, how quickly things changed in popular music. It was Philip Larkin or Kingsley Amis, I forget which. They were both jazz aficionados, who said that jazz had gone from Monteverdi to John Cage in 50 years. I believe I have the time period right. Well, popular pop music went from Love Me Do in 1962 and Tales from Topographic Oceans, which by Yes, which came out in 1973. That's a space of 11 years. And no one in 1962 would have considered that something like Tales from Topographic Oceans, which is roughly 4 20-minute suites would have even been possible, let alone that what pre-publication orders for this double record set were over 1 million copies. It's a remarkable thing. Bob Dylan, is Bob Dylan art rock? Certainly not musically, in terms of his lyrical obsessions, particularly after he, you could say, abandoned his early protest music. That is, I'll use this word again, Bob Dylan's words in mid-60s were pretty recondite, and a large number of people spent many, many hours trying to figure out what he was on about. Brian Wilson, Phil Spector, well, they raised production techniques. I mean, the lyrical content of the songs that Phil Spector produced were certainly banal, and the music was simple enough. The production was very complicated. Brian Wilson, around the time of Surf's Up and Smile, he had left behind the surfing songs and the hot rod songs, and was essentially writing about himself and his difficulties in the world, which bemused the other members of the band and absolutely infuriated Mike Love. Later in what I believe is 1968, the Beach Boys had a top 10 hit with a song called "Do It Again." It's all about surfing, because that's what the Beach Boys started on about. So the Rolling Stones, I don't think that they could be called an art rock band, although they did delve into psychedelia, but didn't keep that up for long. Yardbirds, I don't know. The blues band. I mean, a good white blues band. No question about it. 10cc, definitely an art rock band, both in the musical approach and complexity, and in the complexity of their lyrical approach. The Who, I don't see as an art rock band. I mean, they smashed guitars and wore Union Jacks, but this is what George Melly, the critic, called a revolt into style. The Kinks were the first band, I believe, to feature a sitar, Indian modes, on a pop song. And the lyrical concerns are very sophisticated in many of their songs. So that's sort of a toss-up. Pink Floyd, definitely art rock, both musically and lyrically. I thought that I would look at the Pitchfork list of 100 best albums of the 1970s. I should mention before I do that, the Canterbury scene, which associated with Kevin Ayers and the original Soft Machine, and all manner of bands. Much of that is definitely art rock. Let's see, number 100, we have Brian Eno's Before and After Science from 1977. Yes, art rock. Neil Young, no, actually, but if you look at the solo stuff he did within Buffalo Springfield, Expecting to Fly, say, that is very much art rock, and it's rather a pity that Neil didn't continue to indulge that. Robert Wyatt, number 88 with Rock Bottom. Well, Wyatt, of course, was part of the Canterbury scene, and this was a record put out originally by Virgin, and yes, that art rock. Robert Wyatt, interestingly enough, had a top 30 hit and appeared on Top of the Pops. It was a Neil Diamond song, I'm a Believer, but it was played by all of the major art rock boys around at the time. The Harder They Come soundtrack, no. Iggy Pop's The Idiot. Yes, I suppose you could say that The Idiot is an art rock record, far more so than the follow-up, record. Led Zeppelin, Physical Graffiti. Well, with Led Zeppelin, you just have this. Well, Jimmy Page was a great producer, and he was the first person to discover how to make a band sound like a monster in the studio. As for their preoccupations, lyrically and musically, no, I don't think so. King Crimson, Starless and Bible Black, yeah, I would say art rock, both musically and lyrically. Jimi Hendrix, no. Kraftwerk, The Man Machine. This is art rock, which became very popular indeed, especially in Britain, where Kraftwerk had, several years after it was initially released, a #1 hit called The Model. You see Kraftwerk lyrically, musically, and in terms of style. I'm looking at the beautiful and startling Russian constructivist cover for The Man Machine. Throbbing Gristle. Well, yes, 20 jazz funk greats. Yes, weirdo rock. Is weirdo rock definitely must it be art rock? Fela Kuti, no, I don't think so. Devo, Are We Not Men? We Are Devo. Well, Devo invented their own aesthetic. And I think that any band that invents its own aesthetic is definitely art rock. Similarly, the French band Magma, they invented their own aesthetic and they invented their own language. How about that? Giorgio Moroder, From Here to Eternity. Giorgio Moroder is the man who made disco respectable, or you could say he made disco listenable. Quite a pioneer, so we'd have to include him. Roxy Music, For Your Pleasure. That was the second Roxy Music album. The first two Roxy Music albums were definitely art rock. And then after Brian Eno left, Brian Ferry decided he wanted to become pretty much a traditional soul singer, which he eventually accomplished. Joni Mitchell. A lot of jazz influence in Joni Mitchell. I don't know. I'm not very good on this because I've never liked her very much. She wrote a song called Judgment of the Moon and Stars, Ludwig's tune, where she explicitly compared herself to Beethoven. Wire, 154, 1979. Wow, there's a lot of art rock here. Wire was an art school band, and they were an art rock band. No question. You listen to songs like, I Am the Fly, and very, very unique lyrical concerns. Harry Nilsson Schmilsson from 1971. I don't know. I don't think that you could say that. Jump Into the Fire. One of my that song, Harry Nilsson is not associated with bangers, as they say, but Jump Into the Fire, definitely one of those. The Stooges, Raw Power, 1973. This is one of the most badly recorded records ever issued by a major record company, in this case Columbia Records. Apparently an engineer was hired who didn't know how to work a board, and 2 channels only were recorded, such that even after David Bowie had a go at mixing it, and even after it was remastered about a decade ago, the drums and bass are practically, they're difficult to hear. And I suppose this sort of incompetence is seen by some as art rock. The Stooges, I guess they invented their own aesthetic as well. George Harrison, no. David Bowie, yeah, I would have to say the use of very strange chords that typically you wouldn't see going together. Lyrical concerns, again, Ziggy Stardust, that's an aesthetic all in its own. I'm talking a lot about style here, but style has been essential to popular music from the very beginning. David Bowie's Hunky Dory, 1971, is, yes, Randy Newman, very good traditional singer-songwriter, using the top hired guns in Los Angeles. I would call him art rock only in the sense that his lyrical concerns are as far advanced as you can get in pop music. David Bowie, Aladdin Sane. I would put all of that, all of the Bowie albums, except that bad patch that he went through. Blondie, Parallel Lines. No, I wouldn't call that art rock, or Houses of the Holy either. Leonard Cohen, Songs of Love and Hate, 1971. Let's see. Lyrically, definitely. Here you have a poet, a real poet, who decided that he was going to become a singer-songwriter, and he managed to pull it off. Van Halen, no. King Crimson, Red, great cover, great album. It's art rock, no question. King Crimson had a problem. They did a lot of improvs, and Ken was great at improvs, but what they did in the studio was they did improv and then they edited it, just like Miles Davis did. King Crimson, there's tracks like Providence, say, to give an example, where it simply doesn't work. I think that Robert Fripp complained that the other members of the band were just not as interested in improv as he was. And for improv to work, well, one needs talent. The band needs to be tight, but there must be a high level of, interest. James Brown, I don't know. James Brown's sound is really, it's singular. It is really overpowering. There's no one quite like James Brown. Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon. Well, yes, of course. Faust 4. Yeah, you can't get much more art rock than having someone destroy concrete with a machine on stage. Virgin Records put out the Faust tapes with a bargain basement price, so that it became a runaway bestseller in Britain. And most people listened to the album once and then never played it again. Herbie Hancock, Headhunters. I suppose you could say that the integration of the synthesizer into funk music is pretty art rock. Pink Floyd's Metal, well, yes. Big Star, Third or Sister Lovers. I don't know. That album is so all over the place, and yeah, I don't know. I'd have to think about that one. Neil Young, On the Beach. This Young's obsession with what seemed to him to be the end of the world, or the end of California, or his hatred of rich people's stars. It's interesting. Iggy Pop, Lust for Life. Cluster, Zuckerzeit. I think everything that Cluster did, they were a great German duo, could be considered art rock. The Cars, eponymous album, well, it's great. And I suppose Rick Ocasek might have considered it to be art rock. Yeah, that's a toss-up. Surf's Up by the Beach Boys. Outstanding cover. Beautiful. Very arty cover. But there's some horrible tunes in there. Mike Love, Discovering Transcendental Meditation. Keep It to Yourself. Surf's Up Until I Die. Certainly those songs could be considered art rock. John Lennon, Plastic Ono Band. I'm not going to say anything about that record. I hate it. Ramones, Rocket to Russia, 1977, which is their best record, their third. Again, they invented their own aesthetic, both visually and lyrically. People say that it's dumb guy music. The Ramones were not dumb guys. Miles Davis, yes, definitely. Paul Simon's debut album, I don't think so. Can, Future Days, well, of course, art rock. Nick Drake, Brighter Later. Well, Brighter Later was, I suppose, his his rock record. It's very sort of, well, it's not all that rocky, actually. It bears some resemblance to Sunshine Pop. Again, in terms of lyrical complexity, I mean, well, Nick Drake goes even further than Randy Newman. Creedence Clearwater Revival, not art rock. Steve Reich, Music for 18 Musicians, well, yes. I think by definition, Elvis Costello, this year's model, no. Sex Pistols were conceived to a large extent as an art object by Malcolm McLaren. That the music was, or their aesthetic was steeped in situationism. It wasn't just, outrage. And I believe it was Jamie Reed who invented the kidnap style lettering. Jamie Reed's stuff, his album covers, the single covers are pretty tremendous. Tim Buckley, Star Sailor. I saw Tim Buckley play in Vancouver. He was backing up Status Quo, the English boogie band. You saw a lot of strange combinations on stage in those days. That's one of the things that made going to concerts in the 1970s so much different than it is today. Marvin Gaye's "What's Going On?" Well, it's a black man looks at America. That is big job. He took on Miles Davis, Live Evil. Yes. Al Green, Call Me. No, Al Green is just it's just great music. It's not art at all. The Congos, Heart of the Congos, I'm not familiar with that. Talking Heads, more songs about buildings and food. Well, the Talking Heads were an art school band, and they made art school, art rock. Even after they started incorporating heavy funk elements into it. The Clash, no. Again, they developed their own aesthetic. How can I keep using this word aesthetic, that it was important for bands in those days to have a certain look, or to a lot of them to have a certain look. And that's really, well, I suppose Justin Bieber has a certain look. He looks like a meth head who is about a month away from death. Michael Jackson, Off the Wall. I don't think that's art rock. The Specials, no. Fleetwood Mac, Rumors, no, definitely not. The Modern Lovers, their eponymous album, which was recorded years earlier but released in 1977. You know the joke that Jonathan Richman went to more Velvet Underground concerts than the Velvet Underground. So the music is quite primitive. But Richman's his look at the world, the way he examined the world, was pretty arty. And he names checks Monet in one of his songs. Suicide, its eponymous album of 1977. Yeah, I think so. XTC, Drums and Wires. Not that one. The first two albums, I mean, Andy Partridge was into dub very, very early. And the first two albums, quite experimental in a way that Drums and Wires isn't. Of course, Drums and Wires is much more enjoyable. Elvis Costello, Miami is True, no. Pink Floyd, Wish You Were Here, yes. The pop group, why? Well, if you're going to call your band the pop group, I think you've announced your intentions pretty strongly. Saturday Night Fever soundtrack. I don't want to get an argument, about disco, but no, I don't think that it is art rock. Wire, Chairs Missing, definitely. Pink Floyd's The Wall, yes. Talking Heads, Fear of Music, yes. And we're heading into the top 30 here. Miles Davis on the corner. I'm looking at this really ugly cartoon cover. Yeah, he was. Miles was really simplifying his sound by that time. Tago Mago by Can, 1971, definitely. The Beatles, Let It Be, no. For all Paul McCartney's artistic pretensions. Paul McCartney, to this day, complains that, Oh, I don't know why they say that John Lennon was the experimental one. I was listening to Stockhausen. Sure you were. Led Zeppelin 3, no. Stevie Wonder, Inner Visions. It's a great record. I don't think it's art rock. Neu, the eponymous record by the German band. Yes, definitely. And they didn't invent rhetoric, but they rather claimed it as their own. And of course, running out of money making a record and then deciding we have to put something on the second side and taking what you've got and speeding up or slowing down the speed, that is very art rock. Brian Eno's Here Come the Warm Jets. I would say on balance, yes, the first Ramones album, definitely for reasons I said earlier. The first Wire album, Pink Flag. I mean, look at the cover. It's just a very simple picture of a flag, which has been the cloth, which has been painted pink. What does a pink flag mean? Does it matter? It's just such a striking image. The number of tracks on that record, hey, we're going to have a song that's 48 seconds long. Why? Because we've said everything we need to say in 48 seconds. A song called Reuters, which is about a correspondent reporting from a country which is falling to pieces. I've talked about Serge Gainsbourg in this space earlier, the Histoire de Mélodie Nelson. Yes, that is very much art rock. Now, keep in mind, there's a Pitchfork's idea of the best 100 records. Among musos, to use that word, there's a large degree of agreement about what the best records were of the 1970s. It becomes the closer you get to the present day, the more fractured that agreement becomes. Coming in at number 20, T-Rex's Electric Warrior. I would say no, great record, but not art rock. Can's Agabam Yazzie, yes, definitely. Miles Davis's Bitches Brew. Yeah. Funkadelic, Maggot Brain. There's a tremendous cult which exists to this day around Funkadelic and the parliaments. I mean, imagine having, say, two bands going at the same time. I'd have to think about that one. Buzzcocks, Singles Going Steady. Pete Shelley definitely liked Motoric, and he adored Mikhail Karoli. I don't think that you could call the Buzzcocks art rock as much as I love them. The Who's Next? No. The Velvet Underground's Loaded. Yes, but lyrically, most of all. Nick Drake's Pink Moon. Yes. The Stooges' Funhouse. Yeah, I mean, the sound of Funhouse by the Stooges is really the sound of nihilism, I remember Iggy Pop saying in an interview that, what I always liked about David Bowie was that he appreciated, our songcraft. And he was talking to Funhouse. They didn't have anything when they went into the studio. They just, turned their instruments on, and Iggy started yowling, and they managed to come up with Funhouse. No songcraft there. The Rolling Stones, Exile on Main Street, no. And then we get into the top 10. Another Green World by Brian Eno. Yes, definitely art rock. Joy Division, Unknown Pleasures. Joy Division. That's kind of a tough one because they were one of the first post-punk bands. Their music is not particularly complicated. I mean, what we have is Ian Curtis singing about his own agony. Of course, the covers for both Joy Division albums are exceedingly artistic. Gang of Four, Entertainment. I don't know. I don't think so. Led Zeppelin 4, no. Kraftwerk, Trans-Europe Express. Okay, what a gorgeous cover. Yes, art rock. Bob Dylan, Blood on the Tracks, I would say no. Sly and the Family Stone. There's a riot going on. Great cover. I don't think that it's art rock. Television Marquee Moon. Yeah, that definitely. Definitely. And The Clash, London Calling. No, that's in at number 2. Number 1, David Bowie's Low. Yes, I suppose you could say that Low is the artiest of all of David Bowie's art rock records. Let's have a look at the chat. The mothership coming down, says Don Willis. Moved away from Afro stuff, been BLM'd, says Red Sulfur. I don't know. I'm in that category. Stuff white people like. Listening to black music black people don't listen to anymore. Let's see. Iranian psychedelia from the 1970s. Wow. Glib Medley says the production of Unknown Pleasures makes it art rock. Martin Hannett. Yeah. Hannett had a really unique way in the studio. Das Model, says Don Willis. Sisters of Mercy. Does goth count? I mean, Bauhaus, the band Bauhaus. Bela Lugosi's dead. Yeah, I suppose they would count. The Fall were arty. Yes, Prol, Artie Proles with Metal Mike. I like Rocksteady, says Chokakin 666. What about Sparks? Well, lyrically, conceptually, when they became a duo. But I mean, of course, Ron was an art school student. He studied art at UCLA, and his brother studied movies at UCLA. Always a very visual presentation. I mean, there's no lyricist at all like Ron Mael, because his concerns are just so strange. Like being small, being a child, and having to look up all the time at adults, and adults telling you that you can't speak to strangers. That's just, I mean, one of the things I lament about what's happened to pop music is, you can write a song about anything, like Wire, with 2 songs about insects on the same record. But people don't want to write songs about anything anymore. They want to write songs about love, which is mostly a boring topic. Yes, Glib Medley quotes the end of Reuters, looting, burning, rape, which is drawn out. The Jams KLF Time Lord, says Metal Mike. Yeah, I spoke about KLF a few weeks ago. Yes, they were an art project that happened to come up with a number 1 song. Glib Medley says KMG on his anti-Maca trip. No, I don't like him. I do not like him. I don't like John Lennon either. You've ever seen the Rock and Roll Circus movie? It has a rather astonishing performance by The Who of a quick one when he's away to get all the harmonies right. And that's the only time I've heard that song where they don't botch the harmonies. They have these interstitial bits with Mick Jagger and John Lennon, sort of joshing around. And I've seen this several times, and whenever I cringe, whenever we get to the interstitial bits, because I look at Mick Jagger and I think, I like this guy. And I look at John Lennon, I think, and hear him, and I think, I do not like this guy. In fact, I would like to punch him in the mouth. Slipknot. I have no comment on that. Let's see. Flock of hair gulls. Was listening to Branicald yesterday, says Oakensign. I'm really not familiar with that. The Clash first album, best album. Yeah, because there's 2 versions of that, the American version and UK version. I prefer the UK version. The Residents. Yes, definitely. Ashley Main Bravo says, is Bo Burnham's new comedy music special Inside overrated? I don't know who Bo Burnham is, and I haven't seen it. Bo Burnham. I'll have to remember that. Public Image Limited. You know, they're named after a Muriel Spark novel. You know, and of course, the Metal Box. That was a really nice concept. You know, John Lydon decided he's not Johnny Rotten anymore, and he's not going to be, making pop music anymore. Let's say I dislike Public Image Limited. Well, Per Ubu, I quite like them, but Pill, the idea of Pill seemed to be, I've suffered, now it's your turn. Cockney Rebels. I'm trying to remember the name of the frontman of that. He was notorious in the British music press at the time for the exceedingly high opinion he had of himself and his work. Let's see. Red Sulphur says tons of dark folk goth was purged for YT for being close to NS, presumably. Candio is my favorite Cars track. It's not my favorite, but Let's Go from the same album. That to me is just a perfect pop song. And it is really, lyrically, I find it quite touching, Pixies were more surf. Well, you're talking about lyrical concerns, writing a song about Samson and Delilah. Of course, well, from Samson's point of view. Well, I mean, what Tom Jones had his hit, Delilah, right? Which wasn't about the biblical Delilah, I don't think. I mean, so many strong, so many strange, so many, I guess Francis discovered that there's a lot to be found in the Old Testament in terms of fascinating, weird, violent stories. Let's see. Speaking of Big Star, the doc on them is now free on YT. I was a bit disappointed by it. Still worth watching, though. That's from Anne Run. I don't know. I have a really savage attraction to Big Star, and I don't know. The story, all of it, it just makes me very, very sad, footage of Big Star playing, but I mean, without Chris Bell, I mean, is it really Big Star? Of course, he was only there for the first album, although he's said to have, written, I don't know, 3 or 4 songs on the second that he wasn't credited for, or perhaps didn't even want credit because he was so disappointed by what had happened. Portishead, I'm going to have to talk about trip hop one of these days. Trip hop came along. I thought, I really, really like this. And it seemed to come and go so fast. And I thought, why? Why did it disappear? Anyway, I'm going to wrap up the show here. Thank you all for tuning in. If you like the show or any part of it, I would appreciate it if you would click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. I'll be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. And as previously mentioned, I'm going to be talking about a war film, World War II film, directed by the great John Ford from 1945, about the war in the Pacific, called They Were Expendable. And on the book club on Friday, I'm going to be discussing Francis Ween's excellent book, biography, on Karl Marx. And next week, on Music Monday, I'm going to be talking about, something classical. I'm going to be talking about the sons of Johann Sebastian Bach. If you'd like to make a donation to this live stream, which would be gratefully received and would actually much needed at this time, my PayPal account is linked to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. I'll just tell you, you may know that my father died of COVID, or from COVID, in May of last year. He was 89, so it wasn't exactly a surprise. Well, for various reasons, including some sabotage, the estate has still not been settled. All right. And so I find out yesterday from the executor of the estate, who was my brother, that the province of British Columbia has slapped a $8,800 fine on the estate because it was because my father's condo was unoccupied. Well, it was unoccupied for most of 2020 because my father was put into a hospital in November of the previous year, and then into a long-term care facility where he lived until he died on May the 5th. And because of COVID and other factors, including some sabotage, the condo could not be sold because the will had not been probated. And this law was brought in to punish overseas Chinese who buy condos in Vancouver and elsewhere and have no intention of occupying them. The fact that it has been wielded against my father's estate when it would not be possible. Well, I lived in the condo for a couple of months. What was it, 3 months or something last year, leaving in December 17th. But apparently that is not enough. It's not long enough. And subsequently, who squealed? Who squealed on my father's estate? I'm wondering. Was it those Herodins on the Strata Council? It just living in a condo. It's like living on an Indian reserve or in a communist country. You can't do this. You can't do that. You can't do this. You can't do that. You were violating the terms of, etc. And then afterwards, apparently they were saying, oh, no, you weren't allowed to live in your father's condo for the time that you did. And you weren't allowed to smoke on the balcony, although they knew that I did it for the longest time, and they'd seen my brother do it as well. Apparently, nothing is allowed in any of these condos without prior permission. But as I say, it's just, it's an unpleasant shock, for the estate to be penalized another $8,800 because of the fact that my father died. Anyway, if you would like to make a donation to this live stream, my PayPal is attached to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations may be made directly via Interact at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.